Mario Kart has always been Nintendo's flagship franchise, but prior to that, there was a little game that came out on the Super Nintendo called F-Zero. In this video, I'm going to go over all the F-Zero games that came out in North America, from the original game on the Super Nintendo that came out in 1990, all the way to the final one on the Game Boy Advance in 2004. And yes, it's been that long since we got a new F-Zero game. Sure, some of the F-Zero games have been re-released on the eShop or the Virtual Console, but none of the F-Zero games have really gotten the same treatment as other Nintendo franchises. You know, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Kirby. Those have gotten full, like, some of the games have gotten full HD remakes or just remasters of some kind, or even compilations. But F-Zero's been stuck on the past, and we just get, like, just basic re-releases on these newer systems. So it'd be nice if they would give us a, like, where's my F-Zero GX HD? That's all I want. Most racing games up until this point were fairly grounded in reality, using cars or bikes of some sort, but Nintendo decided to be different with F-Zero. Let's give them some futuristic floating vehicles and make them go really fast. Oh boy, do they go fast. Until you get a feel for the way they control, you'll be playing bumper cars with the walls. When it comes to the original F-Zero, there's only two modes, Grand Prix and Practice. Practice just lets you race around the tracks either alone or with other AI players. It's a nice way to learn the tracks without being bombarded by other players. Aside from that, there's the main attraction, Grand Prix. You have 3 Grand Prix to choose from, each containing 5 races, and each race is 5 laps. You can also choose your difficulty, beginner, standard, or expert. Or, as the instructional manual calls it, beginner. Yes, according to the official instruction manual that Nintendo included with the game, it is called beginner, which is different from the beginner that they listed up here. There is a master difficulty to unlock. All you have to do is beat each Grand Prix on expert. And as you might expect, the goal of the game is to come in first. I mean, it's a racing game, what'd you expect? After the 5 races, if you have the highest total score, then you'll win. And that's how math works. Some racing games up until that point might give you boosts, and F-Zero does as well. After you finish the first lap, you'll earn a boost, and each lap you finish after that will give you another boost. You can only store up to 3 at a time, so it's either use it or lose it. You do have health that you have to keep an eye on. You can very quickly lose your health once you start bumping into walls left and right, which will happen very frequently. But you can replenish your health by driving over health strips. My only complaint about those is I wish it refilled your health faster, but that's a problem that gets rectified in future games. When it comes to actually driving and like the controls, it's fairly standard. You have your gas, brake, and drift, and of course your boost, like I mentioned. But I didn't really use the drift all that much. I had a tendency to just kind of like tap the gas button rather than hold it down and drift, because it slows you down and allows you to make the turns easier and sharper. One thing that I did learn was when you make turns, sometimes you just can't avoid hitting the walls. So it's actually better to just use it to your advantage and play ping pong with yourself. You have to plan ahead and adjust yourself after you hit the wall. One thing about this game, though, is if too many people pass you, you will automatically lose, which kind of sucks, but at the same time, it's kind of nice because if you're that far behind, that probably means you're not going to win. Aside from that, there isn't a whole lot more I can really think to say about this game. I mean, it's a racing game that came out in the early 90s. Games back then could only do so much. I mean, it was one of the first games that used Nintendo's Mode 7, which was basically a way for them to rotate images. So when you're playing, the game is actually just rotating the track. You're not actually going anywhere. Fast forward 7 years and we finally get a sequel on the Nintendo 64. F-Zero X. They added the X to make it sound cool. It is fitting because the music in this game is quite badass. Let me just play some of it for you. Many games from the 16-bit era attempted to make the jump to 3D. Some did an awesome job at it, and some not so much. F-Zero translated perfectly. They didn't just give us an awesome game, they went all out. Instead of 3 cups having 5 races, we have 4 with 6 races. That's double the amount of tracks from the original. However, there is a 5th cup called the X Cup. You can unlock it by beating the Joker Cup on Expert. This cup actually randomly generates 6 new tracks every time you play it. Yes, randomly generated tracks on the Nintendo 64. That was unheard of back then. And let me tell you, these tracks can range from easy to damn near impossible. Then we have our characters. The original game only had 4 to choose from, each with varying speeds and handling. This one has 30. That's way more than the original. And the characters are interesting to say the least. Just to name a few, you have Captain Falcon, Evil Captain Falcon, Tarzan Captain Falcon, James McCloud, like from Star Fox, and the Mighty Gazelle. I know gazelles can be fast, but this character looks like a futuristic killer robot. Calling him the Mighty Gazelle doesn't exactly seem fitting. I mean, he looks like the Terminator. Let's call him the Mighty Gazelle. Anyways, each character has their own unique stats. Not to mention, when you select the character, you can actually choose whether you want your character to have better speed or better acceleration. So there's quite a large variety of options to choose from. Once you select your game mode and character, the second the race starts, you can tell it's fast. Like, much faster than the original. While it's still the same basic game, a number of things have changed. Like the fact you're racing against 30 people. And if you don't like that, you can just kill them now. You can actually do a side attack and wipe out your opponents. And every time you kill someone, it actually restores some of your health. Boosting has changed as well. You still unlock it after finishing your first lap, but now you have unlimited boosts. Well, okay, that's a lie. Each time you use a boost, it actually takes some of your health away. It creates kind of a risk-reward system. The more often you use it, the less health you have. So you have to use it when you feel it's appropriate. Otherwise, you're just going to commit suicide. And you're probably not going to win if you're dead. On the subject of health, the health strips actually restore health way faster than the original. Between that and the fact that you have so many more boosts you can use, it makes the game so much faster. Unfortunately, the tracks feel a little more open, giving you more room to breathe. They also aren't flat anymore. It'll like do loops and straight up flip you upside down like in Mario Kart 8, except, you know, this game came out like decades before Mario Kart did the anti-gravity thing. So yeah, F-Zero did it first. But so did Crash Nitro Kart, but that's besides the point. Speaking of Mario Kart and F-Zero, they straight up put Mario Kart 64's Rainbow Road in this game. Like, I mean, look at the maps. It's very much a one-for-one. I mean, well, it's not an exact copy. It is more difficult due to the lack of safety rails, but it's still kind of fun to see a reference from another game in here. The only other thing I really want to talk about is the game modes. Most of them aren't really worth mentioning because they're basic. You know, you get your Grand Prix, Time Attack, Versus. But the one I want to talk about specifically is Death Race. Because you can now kill your opponents, they actually made a game mode specifically for doing that. So, you know, the goal is to kill them rather than win the race. So let's give it a go. Whoops. That was intentional, I swear. Next game up is F-Zero Maximum Velocity for the Game Boy Advance. It's like the original game on Super Nintendo, except, you know, in handheld form. Unfortunately, I just don't really have much to say about it that I haven't said about the original. Everything they changed in F-Zero X for the 64, they undid and reverted back to the original game. Boosts don't consume HP anymore, you get 1 per lap, you can't kill opponents. We went from 4 characters to 30, back down to 4, with a few to unlock, of course. Obviously, it's not going to be as big and grand as F-Zero X. The Game Boy Advance is basically a handheld Super Nintendo, which is fine, there's no problem with that. But Maximum Velocity just doesn't feel like F-Zero 3, it feels more like F-Zero 1.5. It doesn't do anything bad, it just doesn't do anything to make itself stand out from the original. Have you ever played Dark Souls? Yes? No? No? Yes? Well, put your seatbelt on because this game is no slouch. It's not hard because of the AI. It's hard because it's fast. Like, vomit-inducing fast. Much like Dark Souls, when you play it for the first time, you're gonna struggle. But once you start getting a feel for how the game plays and how the tracks are, you'll get better. But until then, you'll be slamming into things left and right until your body goes splat against the wall and you become nothing more than a blob. Or you could just rage quit and say, "F this game." Vomit and deformed body parts aside, if maximum velocity took a step back, F-Zero GX takes multiple steps forward, being bigger and better than F-Zero X. GX, in my opinion, is the pinnacle of the F-Zero series. Most of the time when I talk to people about F-Zero, it's usually about GX, and for good reason. It's fun. I mean, why else would you play it? For the cutscenes? Oh, don't you worry. We'll get to story mode. It's definitely a experience. Just like X did before it, GX not only improves, but just adds more. There is so much content in this game. The levels in this game are a step above the N64 game, both graphically and how they play. I haven't mentioned the settings for the previous games because, well, look at them. There isn't really much there, just some pictures in the background with some fog for F-Zero X. But look at GX, futuristic cities, deserts, whatever this fiery hellscape is supposed to be. And I mean, look at some of these tracks. When you see a preview, sometimes I'm like, what the fuck am I looking at? This game takes the anti-gravity stuff to the next level. Look at the level Fire Field. While it's essentially one giant pipe, you're constantly circling around it. Or Cosmo Terminal, where you have numerous paths you can take, and they twist the road so you can see the other racers above you. There's a total of 20 tracks. The one downside is there's no randomly generated tracks anymore like F-Zero X had. It's a little disappointing, but whatever. And I have to mention the music. Not just for this game, but for the entire series. The one thing F-Zero has always knocked out of the park was the music. I mean, just listen to it. When it comes to playable characters, there's a whopping 40, 10 times the amount of the original. Unfortunately, I don't have them all unlocked because you have to beat the story missions on very hard, and fuck that. But that's how this game is. To unlock everything, you have to beat everything on the hardest difficulty. But that's besides the point. Not only is there a ton of characters, you just make your own. Granted, you only have so many parts, but still. But you can make an emblem to put on it. When it comes to the actual characters themselves, in the victory screen, you can see them standing there, but they don't stop moving. Look at Captain Falcon. His shoulders keep going up and down. Why? Does he have to take a piss or something? I don't understand. When it comes to the actual gameplay, it's pretty much the same thing as F-Zero X, with the addition of a spin attack. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. At this point, it's time I talk about the story mode. Yes, F-Zero has a story mode. It hasn't been overly present in the games themselves up until this point, though if you look in the manuals, you can see the characters' backstories and kind of like a synopsis. There's even a comic in the manual for the original game, but it's not really that in-depth. It's just Falcon's a bounty hunter tracking down some criminals, and then he goes to race in the F-Zero Grand Prix. The story feels more of an afterthought in those games, but with GX, they changed that. So, to make a short story, well, short, the main villain, Deathborn, is after the F-Zero Championship belt. He needs it so he can combine it with the belt he has from the underworld. The two belts contain the power of light and dark, which when combined, it will give him the power to destroy the universe. What? That's the story. Apparently, that's the best they could come up with. I don't know why the forces of light and dark would be contained in racing belts. So I guess if I want half the power to destroy the universe, I just gotta go win future sci-fi NASCAR. There's only 9 missions, and they're not that long. Some of the levels don't even contribute to the overall story, like when you have to win a race for an old man so he can win money, and for some reason Falcon has to disguise himself. The main problem with the story mode is how cheesy the cutscenes are. It's one of those situations where it's so bad it's good. Fortunately, the gameplay is good. The missions are more or less just objectives, like the first mission you have to collect all the capsules within a certain time limit, or the mission where you can't let the speed drop below a certain amount. Don't touch the wall or you die. Overall, the story mode isn't really anything spectacular. It's definitely something that they could build upon, but we'll get to that, don't worry. Before I move on to the final game, I want to point out that there is another game that came out in the arcades called F-Zero AX. It was the counterpart to GX. You could actually put your GameCube memory card in the arcade unit and it would unlock content for GX. Unfortunately, I was never able to play it due to the fact that arcades died out in my area a long time ago. So I don't want to talk about it because I haven't experienced it, but I just wanted to give it an honorable mention. With that being said, let's move on to the last game that came out in North America, F-Zero GP Legend. The second game for the Game Boy Advance and the unsung hero of the franchise, in my opinion. Remember how I complained about Maximum Velocity taking a step back by reverting everything back to the way the original game was? Well, GP Legend said hell no. This feels like a handheld version of X and GX, and it has plenty of content to boot. Over 30 characters, 20 plus tracks, and a longer story mode, as well as challenges. Not to mention, there's an anime that came out to go alongside it. Yes, F-Zero had an anime. Look it up. Story mode is interesting, to say the least. It's not bad, it just didn't really catch my interest. I very quickly checked out and just started skipping the cutscenes. I will say it does feel more appropriate than GX's combined light and darkness to get power to destroy universe nonsense. And I do like how the story is done in this game though. You actually have 8 different storylines to play. You'll see the story unfold from each character's perspective, though they don't all line up properly. Like, both Rick Wheeler and Black Shadow's final missions is a race against each other, and they both have different endings, so it doesn't quite line up. And the missions are also less exciting than in GX. You see a lot of repeats, like, you know, win a race, or destroy a specific opponent, or help person A beat person B. It's not as varied, but the story mode is much longer though. The gameplay follows the console games and brings back destroying enemies, boost take your health away again, you know, all that nonsense. It literally feels like they converted F-Zero GX to a Game Boy Advance game. It's not quite as fast as GX, but it's understandable considering the hardware it's on. I actually found the game to be the easiest out of all the F-Zeros. Playing the Grand Prix on easy and normal, I was able to come in first place in every race without much difficulty. I honestly feel this is probably the best one to start off on because I found it to be the easiest. I will say, I usually play as Captain Falcon just because he's the character I'm most familiar with, mainly because of Smash Brothers. But when I played story mode in this game, I had to play as other characters, and dear God, Black Shadow cannot turn for shit. It's like he doesn't even have a steering wheel. Like, look, I'm holding all the way right and left and he doesn't move. And speaking of your driving being affected, one thing with all the F-Zero games that I didn't point out yet is if you drive over ice or like sand or whatever this is, it'll affect your steering, you know, as most driving games do. You know, when you go over ice, you tend to slip and slide, but I don't understand. How is my floating vehicle slipping on ice? All I really have left to talk about with GP is the missions and time trials. I haven't really talked about time trials in any of the other games because, well, it's time trials. You just race by yourself and see how fast you can get to the finish line. The missions are kind of like time trials, but not. It's basically get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, and you'll get either gold, silver, or bronze, and that's it. I feel bad because with both GP Legend and Maximum Velocity, I haven't really spent a lot of time in this video talking about them, but that's just because of the similarities to the original Super Nintendo game, which is why I made a video containing all 5 games, because I don't want to have to reiterate myself with every game. And that is where F-Zero ended. Well, technically, we did get F-Zero Climax, but that came out in Japan only, and I'm only going over the North American games, minus the arcade game, but I did give that kind of an honorable mention. But realistically, F-Zero kind of went out on a high note when you think about it, because GX was the last main console game, and that was fan-freaking-tastic, and that's the game most people seem to remember. But GP came out afterwards for for the GBA, and while it wasn't as badass as GX, for a Game Boy Advance game, I think it was honestly pretty good. So between GX, GP, and the anime, that's a nice way to go out on. I'd rather have some great games to end a series on and go out on a high note rather than get some crap. But since then, all we've really gotten is references in other games. Captain Falcon has always been in Smash. Mario Kart 8 actually got 2 F-Zero tracks like Mute City and Big Blue, as well as Falcon's vehicle. And there was an F-Zero level in Nintendo Land. Remember Nintendo Land? You remember you remember it? Nintendo Land? On the Wii U? Remember the Wii U? The Wii U had Switch games on it before they came out on Switch. Wii U.